We are now recording, and this is our second Zoom session on the inner ear anatomy. And I will share screen here so that we can see the notes where we left off and all of that from last week. And you got inner ear anatomy. I'll make it a little bit larger. Inner ear anatomy, and I'll kind of review what we did last week, and then we'll jump ahead and so we can move through it, okay? We said last week that the balance system and the cochlea share the same fluids. They're labyrinths. They share the same fluids. And we said they both have hair cells. And we said they both have a bony labyrinth and a membranous labyrinth. So all that's what's written right here in this top paragraph. Looking at our pictures here, and here's a picture of the bony labyrinth, which would be for the cochlea, the yellow, and the membranous for the cochlea would be the orange. And for the balance organs, the bony labyrinth would be the brown, and for the vestibular system, I should say, for the vestibular system, the bony labyrinth would be the brown, and the membranous would be the pink. And we said inside the membranous labyrinth is a fluid called endolymph that would fill the pink and the orange here. Inside the labyrinths, we said that the fluid was called perilymph, P-E-R-I-L-Y-M-P-H. Now, it's important to remember from last week that all the white here, solid bone, the temporal bone. And we said last week the temporal bone has two parts. It has a soft, porous portion and a hard, petrous portion. The soft, porous portion surrounds mostly the outer ear canal and part of the inner ear. Of the middle ear, I should say, part of the middle ear. So part of it surrounds the outer ear canal, the inner half of it, and it surrounds part of the middle ear space. And then most of the middle ear space and the cochlea, the whole balance system in cochlea, is surrounded by the petrous portion of the temporal bone, which is very, very dense, very solid. Now, if we move to the next slide, you are now looking at the hair cell regions of the balance system and the cochlea. So we said the balance system has the utricle, the saccule, and the semicircular canals. Well, here's the hair cell region inside the utricle, hair cell region inside the saccule, and hair cell regions inside the semicircular canals. Notice that the hair cells are not all located where my cursor is moving here. They're just in the bulbs, and these bulbs are called the ampullae. So these would be the hair cell regions. Here's looking at hair cells. Here's looking at you, kid. Here's looking at hair cells inside the vestibular system. And here's the hair cells themselves where my cursor is moving, and these would be the hairs. And we said in the balance system, the hairs are surrounded by jelly. I can't stand jello. Anyway, surrounded by jelly and topped with little tiny stones. And we said the vestibular system is an interesting thing, because the utricle and the saccule tell linear acceleration, forward and back movement, sideways to sideways movement. They help you detect whether you are moving side to side, whether your eyes are open or not. And the semicircular canals, we said, they help you localize where your head is in space. And we said that these three canals meet at orthogonal planes. And I think last week what I had you do is I went like this, and I said, look at the top corner of the room here. There you go, the top corner where my hand is pointing. That's the meeting of three planes, the two walls and the ceiling. They meet at 90-degree angles to each other. And those semicircular canals enable you to detect where your head is located in space, even if your eyes are closed. Last week we said your sense of balance, not your vestibular system, but your sense of balance overall has three parts. Vision, your vestibular system, and something we call proprioception. 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 Knowledge of where your limbs are in space without you looking. And we even gave an example of that, the Romberg test, which cops often give when they suspect you for drinking and driving. They may have you stand outside your car, and they're going to ask you to stand over here, and I want you to close your eyes, sir, put your arms out to your sides. Okay, now with your left hand, touch your nose, and you should be able to touch your nose. With your right hand, touch your nose. A drunk is going to be doing this. He's going to miss. Okay? Knowledge of where your limbs are in space without you looking is called proprioception. So you take that, you take your vestibular system, and you take vision. And now your stool has 3 legs. Okay? And that's your sense of balance. So when regarding the ear, the part of balance is the vestibular system. Okay, so vision is vision, vestibular system is located by the ear, and proprioception is in every muscle of your body. So, now, looking at the vestibular system itself, that has 3 parts, which is kind of interesting, and it is the semicircular canals, the utricle, and the saccule. And then basically that's how we're breaking things down here. Then we said last week too that here's a close-up of hair cells inside the balance systems, okay, surrounded by jelly with those little ear stones on top. We said a really common pathology of the vestibular system was BPV, benign paroxysmal vertigo. And basically, that's when these ear stones have fallen off to some degree. You're going to get clients, elderly clients, coming to see you, and they'll say, yeah, the doctor said my ear stones had fallen off. And you're going to be thinking, okay, if you hadn't heard of this, you'd really be wondering if the person had smoked something other than cigarettes, okay? The point is, basically, this is a pathology. It's benign. It's not cancerous. It's not going to kill you. It's just a bloody nuisance. When the person ends up moving his head in a certain way, for example, he's just going to tie his shoes. Let's say the person, and he's bending down to tie his shoes, and he might just get his head in a certain position, and whoa, is he dizzy. And that's benign paroxysmal vertigo. Ear, nose, and throat doctors and some audiologists are trained to do positional head maneuvers to try and get those ear stones to go back on top of the jelly again. Okay? It's a treatment. We don't do it, but now you've heard of it. A test for your vestibular system, to test whether there is a pathology with your vestibular system, that test is called electronystagmography, ENG. And that's a test when they put electrodes by your eyes, and then they make lights track, and they're watching your eye movements track the lights. And then they make the lights go this way, and they want to watch your eye movements track the lights. And then I said last week they put warm water in your ear, and they irrigate the ear. The warm water is 6 or 7 degrees above 98.6, and it makes your eyes woo, 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 because the warm water is warming up one of the semicircular canals, and it's inducing nystagmus. Nystagmus is your eyes tracking. Nystagmus is you sitting at a car watching the railroad cars go by, and you're counting the cars. 1, 2, 3. You're tracking, okay? You're trying to find your center. Well, when they irrigate the ear, it excites those hair cells. You're warming up that fluid, and now your eyes start to track one way. And then they make the temperature 6 or 7 degrees below 98.6, and they irrigate the ear again with water, and now your eyes are tracking this way. They want that to happen. It means your vestibular system's working. If it doesn't happen, you got something wrong with your vestibular system. The test is called electronystagmography. You just need to have heard of it, okay? Because your field kind of balances or bounces off related health sciences. You need to know just enough about the balance system to be dangerous, and that's it. Other than that, that's all we study about the vestibular system, because we're not assessing the vestibular system. So, share screen again. Let's get back to the cochlea. That was just a quick review of that. Let's continue, go to here. Okay, this was all vestibular system. Okay, now looking again. Boney Labyrinth. Now remember, all the white is solid bone, okay? And the Boney Labyrinth is just tunnels dug in the bone. A labyrinth, literally like a cave, dug in. So think of this whole system not so much as a presence, but as an absence. Okay, you're digging, now, once you've dug the labyrinths, all the tunnels into the bone, now you're snaking a hose into that tunnel. And you're pouring fluid into that tunnel, and the chemical composition of that tunnel is opposite to that of the fluid in the hose. So there's fluid in the hose, that's the membranous labyrinth. There's an opposite chemical composition fluid surrounding that in the bony labyrinth. So here's another picture highlighting now the membranous labyrinth within the bony labyrinth. And this big coil here is the 8th nerve going to the brain. Once again, utricle, saccule, semicircular canals, and the cochlea. Remember the size of the cochlea and how many turns it has. Basically, it's as big as the tip of your finger, the cochlea, and it has 2.5 coils. Now we're looking at the membranous labyrinth a little bit closer, or not closer so much, but a little bit in more detail. Instead of just showing it as black and round, now you're seeing it as a bit of a triangular shape. And you can see that right here. Note the triangular sort of shape to it. If we advance our slides further, now you can really see that triangular shape. And that's what I want you to concentrate on today, as we started to last time. Because really, the triangular shape divides the bony labyrinth into two. So it isn't so much a round hose surrounded on all sides by certain fluid. Now it's a triangle that has literally split the bony labyrinth into two parts. Here's another picture showing you just the membranous labyrinths, the utricle, saccule, semicircular canals, and here's the membranous labyrinth of the cochlea, and all the nerve fibers leaving the balance organs and the cochlea, forming the 8th cranial nerve to go to your brain. Now here is a cochlea cross section. So all we're doing here is we're taking this and we're making a slice. Do you see my cursor here? We're just going with a saw, cutting straight through it. When you do that, you will now see what I'm talking about. It's surrounded by bone. Here's the bony labyrinth. This is bony labyrinth. This is membranous labyrinth. Bony, bony, membranous. Bone, bone, membranous. The membranous is shaped like a triangle, and like a triangle. Okay? But you now have the 3 chambers inside the cochlea. If we unroll the cochlea, it'll be about 1 inch long, about 2.5 centimeters long. Here's the foot plate of the stapes. When that pushes in, you're pushing fluid here, and the motion of the fluid actually goes around this little corner called the helicotrema. Great little name, and I think I sung it last week. Helicotrema, la 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 la. So then, and then pushing the fluid here to bulge the round window. My mom has a sign up in her kitchen that says, "Those who indulge, bulge." Just thought I'd tell you. Anyway, so pushing in the oval window and makes the round window bulge. But here, this is Boney Labyrinth. This is Boney Labyrinth. And the only place where they communicate, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Where they communicate is through that little passage. Okay? And the hair cells of the cochlea, this is the membranous labyrinth, the scala media. So they call these scala, which is the Italian or Latin word for stairs going around a coil. Scala. Come to my place. So we have some spaghetti, no? It's the scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani. You're going to like the pizza, okay? And the promontory separates the oval window from the round window. So the oval window is associated with the scala vestibuli, which is Boney Labyrinth. The round window is associated with the scala tympani, Boney Labyrinth. The scala media runs a whole length of the cochlea. And note, interestingly, that the scala media gets wider and wider as you go toward the narrow end of the cochlea. This is a point we need to take home because it's all about mass and stiffness. This area has less mass and is more stiff. It will therefore resonate with high frequencies. So high frequencies are located here. The scala media, where the hair cells are, it has more mass here and is less stiff, more flaccid. So it resonates with lower frequencies. That's why low frequencies stimulate this area. Now, if you think about it, where does all sound activation begin? It begins here. And it either stops here, you hear a high frequency. If it stops here, you hear a mid frequency. If it stops here, you hear a low frequency. But by gum, you always have to go through here to get to there, don't you? Okay? And that's why these hair cells die first. Think of them like the carpet in front of your door. The carpet in front of the door gets the dirtiest because all feet go through the door to get anywhere else in the room. That's why you put a mat in front of the door. Okay? That's one colloquial or an analogy way of telling people why high pitches tend to go first, why elderly have trouble hearing treble. So anyway, we'll look a lot more at this later on, but here's my picture of the cochlea left coiled up. Just like the cat's cochlea, okay, I'm just drawing it here. And once again, all bone, solid bone, and then you've got your base of the cochlea is the wide end, the narrow end is the tip. So these two here would correspond to this area here, okay? That down here would correspond to, of course, this area here. Now, we're looking at it coiled up, scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani. Vestibuli, media, tympani. All one. The top one is scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani. And you see it drawn here. Now you can also look and you'll see stria vascularis. Well, that's where the triangle is attached onto the outer wall. And the stria vascularis is this little blue thing here. That's the blood supply and oxygen supply to the hair cells. The hair cells are sitting right here and right here and right here, right where my cursor is shown, in that little yellow slot. That's where the hair cells sit. And can you see how that gets its narrowest at the wide base? It gets wider as you get to the skinny end of the cochlea, and it's widest at the tip of the cochlea. And that's what I was trying to show here. So this picture and this picture correspond to each other. The stria vascularis, vascular, it provides blood supply and oxygen to the hair cells. Spiral ligament is this big blue thing. It holds the whole scala media in place. It fixes or anchors this triangle to stick against the side here. The very bottom, this bottom where I'm showing you, that's called the basilar membrane. B-A-S-I-L-A-R, basilar membrane. This here, the black line, that's called Reissner's membrane. R-E-I-S-S-N-E-R-S, Reissner's membrane. So if we look at the three borders of the scala media, it's Reissner's membrane, basilar membrane, spiral ligament. Those would make the borders of the scala media. Inside the scala media, endolymph fluid. Inside the bony labyrinths, namely scala vestibuli, scala tympani, perilymph. And this big blue weird C-shaped thing, well, shaped like a C when you're looking this way, this is the organ of Corti. Corti was a guy who lived in a van down by the river in Italy, and he discovered parts of the cochlea, organ of Corti. Spiral ganglia, this is part of your 8th nerve. This is your 8th nerve where I'm tracking. See where my cursor is? That's the 8th nerve. This is all 8th nerve. All these branches of the 8th nerve. So they come from the apical end of the cochlea and the basal end of the cochlea. The narrow end, mid place, and the fat end. All hair cells send their messages up the 8th nerve to the brain. And these little things, these little gray balls here, spiral ganglia, those are the cell bodies of the nerve. If you think of a nerve as 2 arms standing out, most nerves have one arm picking up information and the other arm sending information. And the head is the cell bodies. That's where the nerve gets fed. So it's got an arm, and a cell body. And the cell body, a whole bunch of them, because nerves aren't just one thing. Nerves are like a rope. If you think of a rope, it's got hundreds and hundreds of fibers. And that's what a nerve is. A nerve is like a rope. It's got hundreds and hundreds of these fibers. And each fiber is this arm, and a cell body. So when you've got a whole bunch of those cell bodies stuck together, you have what's called a gang. A gang of them. Okay? A gang of cell bodies. Tons of them. If they all had eyes, you'd think they were olives looking at you. Okay? Tons of little cell bodies. And then you've got lots of threads, okay, tons of cell bodies, lots of threads, and then that all joins into a more and more. And now you got a rope, literally a rope going to the rest of your brain. Here's a picture from a manufacturer showing you a cochlea. And you can see where the errors are. Look at how this scala media here isn't any bigger than this one here, which isn't any bigger than this one here. That's technically wrong, okay? But it is showing you this. Oval window, pushing the fluid, perilymph fluid, scala vestibuli, helicotrema, that little hole, scala tympani, hitting the round window. Okay, so the fluids of the bony labyrinth are trading plate, are moving back and forth. When the oval window pushes in, the round window bulges. And it can only be allowed to happen because you've got a hole here, that little helicotrema, which allows those fluids to move. So when the arrows are showing you the direction of the movement of the fluid, and as it gets to the top of the cochlea, wham, now back out. So that's the trade-off movement inside the cochlea. And your scala media, hair cell region, is that triangular region. Here's a cross-section of the cochlea. Once again, scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani, and your hair cells are here. technically wrong. It's showing you the largest scala media here and the smallest here, which is exactly back-asswards because the largest should be here and the smallest here. Here's a close-up of one coil. So we're looking at one coil and a close-up of the coil. Scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani, basilar membrane, Reissner's membrane, spiral ligament. You can see the ligament holding that basilar membrane tight. And then you can see the stria vascularis. Okay, that's the blood supply to the hair cells. And then you see this flap of flesh here, tectorial membrane, and the hair cells would be right here, inner hair cells, outer hair cells. All right, scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani. Perilymph, endolymph, perilymph. Okay, make those your friends. Make that your understanding. Oh yes, and look here, nerve fibers coming out from the hair cells, and here's your spiral ganglia. There's the cell bodies of each of the fibers. That makes those little balls, okay? So this here, what I'm showing you where my cursor is, corresponds to these, which correspond to these. So note the similarity. Note the orientation. Look at this lower right one and move it on. Look at the lower right one and move it on to here. Okay, we're just closer, closer, closer. Here's a closer up still. Okay, moving in even tighter. You can see more detail here. So we're not worried about this scala vestibuli now. There's no hair cells in there. There's no hair cells in the scala tympani at all. Nothing but perilymph fluid. No other cells. It's all about the scala media, the membranous labyrinth of the cochlea. Here's your tectorial membrane. Here's your basilar membrane, Reissner's membrane, stria, or I should say spiral ligament, where my cursor's moving, stria vascularis, the blood supply to the hair cells. And here's your hair cells. 3 outer hair cells, 1 row of inner hair cells. Outers, inners. Outers, inners. Inner hair cells send all sound info to your brain. Without the inner hair cells, you are deaf. But why do you have outer hair cells then? Inner hair cells have a fundamental flaw. They can't pick up sounds softer than conversational speech. They can't pick up sounds softer than 50 dB. They can't pick up a whisper. They can't pick up a distant cricket. They can only pick up conversational speech and louder. So, how do inner hair cells pick up soft sounds? The outer hair cells help. And we will look at this next week, or when we're after midterm time. We're going to look at how this all works in the cochlea. Suffice to say right now, the outers help the inners pick up sounds softer than 50 decibels. And that's how come, and these outers die first. They're the wimps. They die first, leaving you with about a 50 decibel hearing loss, which is the most common degree of hearing loss in the world. Mild to moderate sensory neural loss. Welcome to Mrs. McGillicuddy. Welcome to presbycusis. Outer hair cell damage, leaving you with about a 50 decibel hearing loss. Not lying. All right, now let's go and look closer at this organ of Corti. This whole thing that I'm circling here is called the organ of Corti. Okay, let's move closer. Organ of Corti. Tectorial membrane, inner hair cells, outer hair cells, and a whole bunch of supporting cells. And look at how the nerve fibers leave the hair cells. Even the outer hair cells, the nerve fibers leave them. Okay? And actually, the inner hair cells, we said last week, are afferent. They send sound info to the brain. The outer hair cells, we said last week, are efferent. They take info from the brain. So the direction here is, follow my cursor, is this way. And outer hair cell direction, the direction is this way. So it's a two-way street. The brain's talking to the cochlea is talking to the brain. Now, this picture is showing you all the cells except the hair cells. Here you're looking at the hair cells. Now we're taking out the hair cells, and you're looking at all the supporting cells. So cells of Henson, cells of Claudius, phalanges, rods of Cordy, blah, blah. I don't care if you memorize, don't memorize. Please don't memorize that. Just say supporting cells. Okay? Now, supporting cells. Oh, we're looking at the organ of Cordy a different way. Okay, more of a 3D way, more of a three-dimensional. Inner hair cells. Here's the hairs. Here's the cell. And here's the eighth nerve fibers. Outer hair cells, outer hair cells, outer hair cells, and nerve fibers leaving them too. And then your supporting cells all around. Okay, back over to here. There's something rather interesting taking place. Let's go to our notes now. So I think it's time we look at our notes and make sure that we're following things correctly. So we went through our vestibular system. That's all good. That's all good. Benign paroxysmal vertigo, electronystagmography, we all covered that already earlier in this session. Cochlea, and we're moving down into the cochlea, a winding organ with 2.5 turns, remarkably inaccessible because it's buried inside the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Geez, where have we heard that before? Okay. Note the location of Boney and Membranous Labyrinths. Also note the different fluids. Membranous Labyrinth contains endolymph. You don't need to know that it's high in potassium and low in sodium. I really don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Perilymph is in the Boney Labyrinth. You don't need to know that it's high in sodium and low in potassium. I don't care. Okay? Just know that they are opposite in chemical composition. Ductus reunions, that's communication of endolymph between vestibular system and cochlea. We said they share the same fluids. Scala, Boney Labyrinth, associate with oval window, scala vestibuli. Scala tympani, also Boney Labyrinth, contains perilymph, associate with the round window. Scala media, sometimes it's called the cochlear duct. This is where it's all at. It's the membranous labyrinth, and it contains the organ of Cordy. It's filled with endolymph. And the organ of Cordy is the end organ of hearing. That's where the hair cells are. Okay. Then you have the helicotrema, la la la. So then you've got that small opening at the apex. When we call the apex of the cochlea, that's the tip. Okay? The apex of the cochlea is where the low frequencies are represented. The wide end of the cochlea is called the base. The base of the cochlea is bigger, and it's where high frequencies are represented. Okay. Close-up of single turn of cochlea. We saw it. We saw Reissner's membrane. We saw basilar membrane. And note, look what I wrote in italics here. So you know we need to know this. Stiff and less mass at the basal fat end of the cochlea. Flaccid with more mass at the apical end of the cochlea. So it's exactly backwards to what you would think when you look at the skinny tip apex versus wide base. It goes exactly back-asswards. Now looking over here, spiral ligament attaches the scala media to the wall. Stria vascularis. Oh, Modiolus. We didn't really cover that, but let's look at it. Modiolus. This almost sounds like somebody's name. Modiolus, come here. Here's the modiolus. It's the bony core inside the cochlea. It's the bony core of the cochlea. Here's the modiolus here. Okay? Remember, the cochlea is totally surrounded by bone. Good, cool. Now this is my view of the organ of Corti. I drew this picture just to keep it simple, but to highlight more the fact that inner hair cells look different from outer hair cells. They're not all just hair cells like this. They're not all just hair cells like that and that and that. They look different from each other. These are fat couch potatoes. Okay? They don't move. And their hairs don't touch the membrane. We'll talk more about that next week, or in physiology, not now. This is just anatomy. Anatomy just covers form. Just later on, we'll talk function. Here's the outer hair cells. They're long, thin test tubes, and their hairs are touching the membrane. And these hair cells literally stretch and shrink. They stretch and shrink constantly. When they shrink, they pull this membrane down to touch these hairs. Because they move, they die first. In any system, the moving part goes first. In any, the CD player goes first, because that's the mechanical part. The speakers go next, because they move a little bit. The amplifier in a stereo system never dies, because it's not moving. Okay? So the outer hair cells tend to die first. Later, the inner hair cells. And that, by the way, is why we call it sensory neural hearing loss. Sensory means outer hair cell death. Neural means inner hair cell death. If you lose outer hair cells, you've got a 50 decibel sensory neural loss. If you've got a neural loss, it means you've got sensory, plus now you've got more, because now your inners are beginning to die. And when you start losing inner hair cells, you start getting more of a severe hearing loss, because this is 50, caught damage here. Now you're damaging this, so your hearing loss is greater than 50. And guess what else goes down the pot? Your clarity of hearing speech, your speech discrimination. If I said to you, say the word cow, you might say ow. Say the word tree, you might say see. Okay, you're missing. I'm not saying see the big black cat. No context. Just say the word. Say the word. And that's part of a hearing test. It's called speech discrimination. And when you've got inner hair cell damage, your speech discrimination is really poor. And that's what you'll study more when you study audiometry. But that's a class that, it's all related. But okay. Now, this is a close-up of a human cochlea that's dead. Okay? This person died. And look at here. Here's scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani. Look at here. Basilar membrane, Reissner's membrane, spiral ligaments. You can see SL. Stria vascularis. Here's would be the outer hair cells. Here would be the inner hair cells. Here's the tectorial membrane that all pulled back because the person's dead. Okay? Here's a close-up again. Here's the scala vestibuli, scala media, scala tympani, basilar membrane, Reissner's membrane, spiral ligament, stria vascularis. Okay, and here's outer hair cells, inner hair cells. Move closer. Okay, woo, let's see where I'm going here. Okay, so now so outer hair cells, inner hair cells, and the tiny little hairs. So let's move closer here. Inner hair cells, outer hair cells. Now it's important to get this. This is part of anatomy too. You have 3,000 inner hair cells in each cochlea. They run all the way up the coils. There's one row of them. 2.5 coils. You have 3,000 inner hair cells, and each inner hair cell has 50 hairs, or stereocilia. Stereo meaning many, cilia meaning hairs. So this is one inner hair cell. This is another inner hair cell. This is another inner hair cell, and another one, and another one, and another one. 3,000 in a row, all the way from the base to the middle to the apex. You have 12,000 outer hair cells, and their hairs are arranged like V's. And 12,000 outer hair cells, and here's how this goes. Remember when I showed you that this basilar membrane gets wider and wider as you go to the top? Look at this. See how this gets wider and wider and wider? See how the hair cell region here is narrowest? The hair cell region here is wider, and the hair cell region here is widest yet? Well, here goes. You have 3 rows of outer hair cells at the wide base of the cochlea. You have 4 rows of outer hair cells at the middle coil of the cochlea, and you have 5 rows of outer hair cells at the skinny apex of the cochlea. Because the basilar membrane gets wider and wider and wider as you move from the wide end to the skinny end. Again, it's backwards to the way you would think. Okay? And that's why simple math should tell you this. If you said, well, Ted, you've got 3,000 inner hair cells, well, then this should be 9,000 here, because 3,000 and 6,000 and 9,000. Where are you getting 12? Well, the reason I'm getting 12 is because as you move up the cochlea, this 3 rows turns into 4 rows, which turns into 5 rows. That's how you end up with 12. Got it? Good. Glad you did. All right, read with me. Modiolus, spiral lamina. What the Sam Hill is a spiral lamina? The spiral lamina is the tiny, thin shelf extending from the modiolus of the Boney Labyrinth, and it comes out of the basilar membrane, out from it to the spiral ligament. So it forms a shelf, spiral lamina. See if I can get a picture of that now. Spiral lamina. Move up. Okay. Spiral lamina. Right here. Right where I'm pointing. Spiral lamina. The basilar membrane is stretched. This is the basilar membrane. The basilar membrane is stretched from the spiral ligament, where my cursor is here on the right. Here's the basilar membrane, and here's the spiral lamina, which is a bony shelf sticking out from the modiolus, out from that central core. So the spiral or the basilar membrane is tied between the spiral lamina and spiral ligament. See, there's 3 spirals in the cochlea. Spiral ligament, spiral lamina, and spiral ganglia. 3 spirals to remember. Lots of anatomy takes place here, I'm telling you. Spiral ganglia. Okay, that's the clusters of 8th nerve cell bodies in the modiolus. One neuron fiber arm goes to the hair cells. The other neuron fiber arm continues to the brainstem, bundled together as the 8th nerve. And then the notes carefully showing you close-up of the scala media. And we looked at that. Organ of Corti contains hair cells and supporting cells. Its floor is the basilar membrane. The basilar membrane is narrow with less mass and more stiff at the wide base. It's wider with more mass and less stiffness toward the narrow apex. Recall from acoustics. Okay? Tectorial membrane gelatinous mass on top of the hair cells. The tops of the outer hair cells are embedded in it. The tops of the inner hair cells are not. Then you have all these supporting cells. And you don't need to know the names of them. Couldn't care less. Just call them supporting cells. As you move on down here, now you may wonder, how do the hair cells talk to two different fluids? How do the hair cells, because remember we said the cochlea is like a battery? And you know how batteries have opposite fluids in them? And if they're opposite fluids, well, how do these opposite fluids communicate with each other? Well, it's called cortilymph. Cortilymph. Highlight that and put a star by it. It's fluid inside the organ of Corti, and it's like perilymph. So it's a little island of perilymph inside the membranous labyrinth where perilymph is not supposed to be. And cortilymph surrounds the cell wall bodies, the cell walls of the hair cells themselves, and endolymph surrounds the hairs. So the opposite fluids create a huge electrical charge. Now let's see if we can show a picture of that. Why don't we bring this closer, and I'll make it larger here, or we'll just highlight it. Endolymph here, all here, that's what it says, scala media endolymph, scala vestibuli perilymph, circle it here. Now look where my cursor is here. Do you see how the hair cell bodies, the cell bodies here, are separated by this line? That line, okay, is the border. The cell bodies are surrounded. All this white area here is filled with perilymph again, but we call it cortilymph because it's inside the organ of Corti. And yet the hairs of the cells themselves, look where my cursor is, the hairs, well, that's touching endolymph. So endolymph in here, endolymph all here, endolymph in here, cortilymph below it. So I'll show you another picture here. Endolymph all around here. Look at my cursor. Endolymph all here, touching the hairs, and cortilymph here. The hair cells are pilloried. Have you ever watched movies about Thanksgiving? You ever watch movies about the Pilgrims in Thanksgiving? Massachusetts, coming over on the Mayflower, shooting turkeys, living on the fat of the land. Okay? What did they do to bad pilgrims in living there? You know, the ones who burned the witches and all that stuff. When you think of Thanksgiving Day and all that, the bad pilgrims were put in a pillory. You know what a pillory is? You had your head and hands were stuck in this thing, this wood. The wood surrounded your neck and it surrounded your wrists. You couldn't get out. And you had to sit like that all day. People passed you downtown looking at you. They could throw tomatoes at you if they wanted to. They could slap your face if they want. You were pilloried, okay? Well, hair cells are pilloried. So if you think about that, have fun. You won't forget it, okay? I'm trying to make you remember. The hair cells are pilloried. The necks are cut off from the hair. The hairs, this fluid here does not mix with the fluid here. The hair cells are pinched off, so the hairs touch one's fluid, and the body of the cell is touching opposite fluid. That's how the cochlea can change movement of fluid into electricity. That's how hair cells are in contact, even though endolymph surrounds them, even though I should say endolymph surrounds the whole scala media, yet the cells themselves are touching cortilymph. And cortilymph is perilymph inside the organ of Corti. All right, we're getting someplace, moving along. Let's look at some electron microscopy of normal versus damaged hair cells. So you're looking at some microscopy here. There's damaged hair cells. Normal, damaged. Notice that the damage is mostly to the outer hair cells. It's not as much damage to the inner hair cells. Outers tend to die before inners. Here's inner hair cells again. Here's outer hair cells. Here's inner hair cells again. Here's outer hair cells. Outer hair cells. Look at the cell bodies like test tubes, long and thin. This is looking down on one inner hair cell. Here's the cell, so you're looking down at it from the top, and here's the 50 hairs. The tall choir boys stand in the back, and shorter ones stand in front, around 50. Here now you're looking down at an outer hair cell. So the outer hair cell is this whole round thing, and it goes down like a test tube, and there's about 100 hairs on top of each outer hair cell. Again, the tall choir boys stand in the back, and the shorter ones stand in front. And never think of them like hairs on a head, because here's a hair on a head. Now, look at this carefully. This is a hair on a head. Here's a hair cell. And on the hair cell, 100 hairs. So these are not like strands of hair. They're made out of a totally different thing. Here's my buddy, a fly, blown up under an electron microscope. Notice in one of his claws, there's a gear. Look closely at the gear. I'm going to bring the gear closer to you. Now you'll see a little white dot on one of the teeth of the gear. I'll bring that closer. That's a hair cell. And here's 100 hairs all clustered together because the cell is dead. So we'll go back and back. Look closely. This is a fly blown up under an electron microscope. In his claw is a gear. Bring it closer, a tiny white dot. Bring it closer, a hair cell. This is why you cannot do surgery on an inner ear. It's too small. You can't replace hair cells. When hair cells die, it's permanent. But always keep in mind the really tiny, tiny size compared to a human hair. It's just phenomenal. Oh, okay, this is just showing you that the cochlea is what we call tonotopic. T-O-N-O, topic, tonotopic. In English, this just means specific frequencies are represented in specific places. Specific frequencies are represented in specific places. Low frequencies are located at the apex of the cochlea. High frequencies are located at the wide base of the cochlea. Always remember that. Specific frequencies are, don't worry about this picture. It's I find it a little bit weird. Okay, here's a picture showing you. Low frequencies are at the top. Mid frequencies in the middle. High frequencies at the base. The cochlea is tonotopic. Once again, the base of the cochlea, toward the middle of the cochlea, and then the apex of the cochlea where the low frequencies are. These slides are showing you that the cochlea is tonotopic. Here's a real spiral ganglion. Here's a bunch of eighth nerve fibers, and here's the cell bodies of those eighth nerve fibers. And this is all the modiolus bone inside the cochlea. Now, we'll end today. What time is it? Gad, zooks, my clock is way far away. It's like I got like 5 minutes left. Okay? About 5 minutes, but I'm going to keep you just to bug you because this is really a phenomenal organ. I mean, this is why we have a field. This is why OTC has an HIS program, because you can't fix this. If you could fix this, we wouldn't have a program. You wouldn't be fitting hearing aids. You fit hearing aids because you can't fix this crap. When this is gone, it's gone. Okay? Middle ear pathology you can fix. If all hearing loss was due to middle ear pathology, well, we wouldn't be selling hearing aids except to a very few people that you didn't want to do surgery on. Otherwise, hearing aids wouldn't even be a business. It's a business because of hair cells. Hair cells define our field, and we're all about hair cells. Call ourselves Mrs. and Mr. Hair Cell, because that's what we are. We fit hearing aids because hair cells are damaged and you can't fix it. How are hair cells innervated? That word, innervate, means how do the hair cells talk to the eighth nerve? Okay, well, here's the spiral ganglion. Now look closely at this. I'm going to go back in slides so I make sure that we're all singing off the same page. Don't get a seizure. I know I'm moving the slides back fast. Okay. Spiral ganglion. Spiral ganglion. Oh, this is the spiral lamina, the shelf. Spiral ligament. Spiral ligament, spiral lamina, spiral ganglia. Nerve fibers go to the hair cells, the cell bodies, and then the nerve continues on to the brain. Spiral ganglia. They don't show the ganglia here. They just don't show it. Okay, now go to where we're talking about. Spiral ganglia. Eighth nerve fibers. Look at how many terminate on each inner hair cell. These are inner hair cells. Dut, 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 dut. Each inner hair cell is spoiled rotten. Each inner hair cell gets 10 eighth nerve fibers. So how many eighth nerve fibers are there? 10 times 3,000. If each inner hair cell gets 10, it's 3,000 times 10. There's 30,000 fibers wrapped together to make the eighth nerve. But how does the eighth nerve talk to the inner hair cells? It spoils them rotten. Each inner hair cell gets 10 fibers. Look at that. Meanwhile, outer hair cells have to share one fiber. So outer hair cells barely talk to the eighth nerve. See, the outer hair cells, the eighth nerve sends info to your brain. And that's what inner hair cells do. They take information, send it up the eighth nerve to the brain. So when you think eighth nerve, what's it connected to? Almost all of it's connected to the inner hair cells. Outer hair cells have a different innervation pattern. Okay? Outer hair cells are totally different. Outer hair cells communicate with another nerve that goes parallel eighth nerve, and it's called the like olives, no pimento, but olivo-cochlear bundle, OCB. Olivo, so O-L-I-V-O, cochlear, C-O-C-H-L-E-A-R, olivo-cochlear bundle. Now, the olivo-cochlear bundle is a small little nerve. Have you ever rode down a highway? When you're riding down, what's the one going through, I don't know, what is it, through from Kansas City to St. Louis? I'll better think of the one going through Oklahoma City, a Highway 4, what's that, Highway 44, some damn thing. Anyway, some great big interstate, okay? You're driving down the interstate, and you might be going down the interstate, and you'll see a tiny little gravel road going parallel to the interstate. You might see a guy with a tractor riding on it, or maybe it's an abandoned road. It's just some piece of junk, little old road, and it's going alongside of the highway. Well, the highway is the eighth nerve, and that little tiny road, that's the olivo-cochlear bundle. So it just goes in opposite directions. So check this out. Back to share screen again. Olivo-cochlear bundle is talking to the outer hair cells, and it is sending information. Okay, no, this is the inner hair cell. Sorry, this is all inner hair cell. So bunch of inner hair cells are all talking to the eighth nerve fibers, and then meanwhile, outer hair cells have to share 1/8 nerve fiber, and all this information goes to the brain. But the innervation of the outer hair cells really is dominated by that olivocochlear bundle. That's a much smaller nerve, and it sends information backwards. It takes information from the brain and sends it to the outer hair cells. So this picture here is all about the eighth nerve. Don't mix this one up with olivocochlear bundle. Inner hair cells, spoiled rotten, they each get 10 fibers. The outer hair cells are really starved. A bunch of them have to share 1/8 nerve fiber. So basically the eighth nerve is all about inner hair cells. But when you're thinking about outer hair cells, how else are they innervated? They are connected to a nerve called the olivocochlear bundle, which is that small little country bumpkin road beside the big interstate. And it goes in the opposite direction. Whereas the interstate goes from the inner hair cells to your brain, the olivocochlear bundle goes from your brain stem to your outer hair cells. So now, hey, look, she's taking a walk. She's cool. It's a good one. At least you get out of the building. So
I gotta get my niece off the bus.
gotta do it. All right, I got it. Let's see if we can finish this here. Your notes. Okay, let's just follow your notes here. Working our way down. This is talking about the shapes of the hair cells, how many you have, how many stereocilia are on each one. Outer hair cells shaped like test tubes. 12,000 in 3 rows at the base to 5 rows at the apex. Look where we are here. Cochlea's tonotopic. Yep, we covered that. And last of all, the hair cells and the afferent, efferent pathways. Olivocochlear bundle consists of efferent nerve fibers. They run along the eighth nerve. As such, it is associated with the outer hair cells. Here, the eighth nerve is a bunch of sensory afferent nerve fibers. It's associated mainly with the inner hair cells, and its cell bodies are located in the spiral ganglion of the cochlea. Moving down here, efferent, olivocochlear messages course in the opposite direction to those of the afferent eighth nerve, and the cell bodies of the olivocochlear bundle are not located near the cochlea. They're located in the brain stem. This is just for your amusement, but basically get the idea. Inner hair cells, afferent. They send info to the brain. They comprise 20% of all hair cells, but they get 95% of eighth nerve fibers. Each inner hair cell gets several, 10, that synapse or connect directly on the inner hair cell. Meanwhile, several inner hair cells, they might get a little bit of olivocochlear stuff, but not much. So the innervation pattern is like the opposite. Outer hair cells are efferent. They take info from the brain back to the cochlea. They comprise 80% of hair cells, but they get only 5% of the eighth nerve fibers. Each outer hair cell gets lots of olivocochlear bundle fibers, and several outer hair cells, they have to share a single eighth nerve fiber. So basically, the innervation patterns, don't freak about them. Just think of inner hair cells, eighth nerve. Outer hair cells, olivocochlear bundle. Inner hair cells, afferent. Outer hair cells, efferent. So the cochlea is a two-way street. It's sending info to the brain. It's taking info from the brain. Inner hair cells talk to the brain. The brain talks to the outer hair cells. There's a loop going on. When we look at physiology, we will discuss how that works, the amazing speed by way it works. We'll talk about traveling waves in the cochlea, how the hair cells get stimulated. In other words, no more anatomy. We'll talk about how it all works, how the cochlea functions, what it does. Okay? All right, cool. Now, if we look at this picture here, see how far, good. Look at this. This is a picture of noise-induced hearing loss. This is an audiogram showing good hearing, and then hearing loss in the high frequencies. Here's the hair cells, inners, outers, all populated, bam, suddenly they're dead. This area here corresponds to the poor hearing here. Interestingly enough, hunters who are right-handed get noise-induced loss in the left ear. Because when I'm holding something like that, it's my left ear that's closest to the barrel. Right-handed hunters tend to get more damage to the left ear for the same reason. I'll stop there because one cannot even talk about this without recognizing the abject horror that took place in Las Vegas. And remembering those people, I guess that's the end for here today. Okay? See you later. We'll stay in touch with you in view of Remind or group email. I'm checking in with Ms. Lynn Royer regarding the 110 midterm, whether it's proctored, all of that. Just sent her an email during the hour between our classes. But we'll see you next week, okay? Talk to you later. Bye-bye.